This story was written January 19th, 2016, the day after Glen Frey's death. I needed a road trip, and I needed it bad. So I got 2 tons of pork rinds, 3 bags of M&Ms, 2 bags of sunflower seeds, and a cooler full of ice and drinks. I got in my pickup, loaded that bad boy up, and hit the road to Winslow, Arizona. Glen Frey of the rock band Eagles had died the day before, and I had to figure things out. Road trips are the great tonic. Each one is worth a ton of psychiatry. Some people turn to group therapy, some to drugs, some to the bottle, some find solace in another person, some hit the gym or take long walks. But for me, cruising down the highway in my truck, watching the scenery roll by to the beat of rock and roll is the great gift to my sanity. I hadn't said screw it like this in a couple of years, and it felt good just to drop everything and go, and I really had to get away. Frey's death was bothering me a lot. The statue of that boy standing on the corner in Winslow, Arizona was pulling me just as strong as Devil's Tower called to Richard Dreyfuss in the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Frey's death was an exclamation point on the fact that the creators of the music that has moved my life is leaving, and I hate it. But I didn't know how to express it until I thought of that statue, which is an enactment of the lyrics of the Eagles song, Take It Easy. A couple of years before, my favorite singer-songwriter John Stewart had died, and there was no place to go for a pilgrimage in his honor either. Although I had trekked many of the places Stewart had trod, Route 66, the entire country of Scotland, the pier in Sausalito where the Trident restaurant used to be, where he and John Phillips, later of the Mamas and Papas, wrote the song Chilly Winds. And although I had sung his songs for years, I could do nothing to honor his passing. I needed a place to grieve for the death of the era of music that I loved. I was like Paul Simon in his haunting song about Graceland and why he went there. And the lyrics go, and my traveling companions are ghosts. I'm looking at ghosts and empties. For reasons I can't explain, there's some part of me that wants to see Graceland. Maybe I've reason to believe we all will be received in Graceland. Well, his lyrics are perfectly said, and I'm drawn to Winslow in the same way and for the same reason, a place to figure this all out and honor the music. My apartment isn't the place at all. No. There are times when the place has to match the mood and my apartment ain't in it. The Doors fans have the Le Père Lachaise Cemetery in Paris where Jim Morrison is buried. Elvis fans have Graceland, and Sinatra has all of Las Vegas. Each of those places marks the end of an era, a focal point of attention to a philosophy and a sound. I had spent days visiting Elvis's birthplace in Tupelo, Mississippi. I spent many hours at the birthplace of Mozart in Salzburg, Austria. I spent weeks riding around the birthplace of the blues near Clarksdale, Mississippi, and even talked to a couple of his acquaintances. I even attended Chet Atkins' funeral at the Ryman Auditorium, home of the Grand Ole Opry in Nashville. Garrison Keillor gave the eulogy, and he was perfect. And now, one of the landmark bands had lost its shining light, its creator, Glen Frey. The album Best of the Eagles was the biggest selling album in the 20th century. And now, with the death of Frey, Eagles were essentially gone, just as the Grateful Dead were gone when Jerry Garcia died. A dissatisfaction and inner nervousness possessed me, and I needed a place to vent. What to do? Well, the only thing I could think of was a road trip. Give the confusion to the road, it'll understand. Spread it over the blacktop, it can take it. And the only destination that I could think of was that statue in Winslow. I didn't put in the first CD until I was on Highway 93, out in the unending gray of the desert on the east side of the Laughlin turnoff. I put in Eagles' Best Of album and let the opening chords of Take It Easy take over. Like millions of people, I know every word of every song, every bass line, every drum punch, every harmony of that song. Curious, the day before Frey died, I was blasé about Eagles tunes, having saturated my brain with them for over 40 years. But since he walked up into the clouds, every song is now sacred. A cathedral eulogy for his death, full of harmony, immortal lyrics, and wet reverb. The first time I saw Eagles was with my brother Daryl in the old Denver Coliseum. The headliners were Edgar Winter with Rick Derringer. Derringer did this master leap onto the stage. Winter's Frankenstein creation was hot at the time, and he was powerful. Eagles were the openers because I remember vividly when they came on stage. Frey was pissed off that half the people weren't seated yet and were wandering the aisles. Eagles had taken the stage on time, and Frey scowled at the audience. This here goddamn rock concert started at 7 o'clock, so sit the fuck down. The next time I saw them, they were headliners at Red Rocks Amphitheater near Denver. The opening act that night was Tom Waits. Now, that's a tough gig for a single performer with no band. Just Waits and his piano. The side rock walls of Red Rocks are so high, the whole outdoor theater is so wide open, the sky so full of stars, the panorama of the Colorado Plains in the distance so vast that it can dwarf a single performer. Waits looked tiny, sitting all alone at his piano. The crowd wanted rock and roll, not Waits' boozy ballads, and they were restless, tossing beach balls, yelling for Eagles, and generally playing grab ass all during Waits' set. And boy, Frey was really pissed off about that. Eagles had recorded Waits' song Old 55, and the Eagles were big fans of Waits. So when the crowd went insane as Eagles walked on stage, Frey let the crowd noise die down a little, and before playing a song, he laid into him about what assholes everyone was for ignoring his opening act. Now, it was highly unusual for a Red Rocks audience to be stone cold silent, but a shamed hush settled on the crowd like a cold fog. Then, when Frey was done with this rant, he hit the opening notes for Hotel California, the crowd went nuts, and all was forgiven. I loved it. As the desert rolled by, I was reminded more and more of my musician days, and sitting behind the steering wheel of a little pickup like this, with music blaring and me screaming along into the windshield. On trips like that, like this, the scope of life is reduced, and small things that would be no big deal at home become the focus of attention on the road. Batteries are a big deal. So are cup holders. Now, there are some who don't take bagged candy or sunflower seeds, and others who live off the stuff. Now, I've been of both schools over the years, knowing full well that after the trip, there would be sunflower husks on the floor, in the space between the center console, in the ashtray, stuck to the bottom of the cup holder, in the glove box, and in the door storage. You can spit the husks into cups for all you're worth, but at the end of the ride, they'll be everywhere else, and it takes a long time to clean up after a long session of sunflower seeds. But what the hell? This was a road trip. I left Highway 93 for I-40 and rolled east. As I drove, places rolled by that I had visited so many times before. Now, apparently, no one has moved the meteor crater. And as I passed the entrance, I recalled vividly the time 20 years ago when, as I was at the rim looking at the enormity of this hole in the ground, an Air Force fighter pilot wannabe buzzed the crater in his C-130 about 100 feet off the deck. The roar of its 4 engines was magnificent, and 100 Japanese tourists hit the dirt in terror. The C-130 crossed the crater from east to west, then banked hard right over I-40 and headed for the clouds. I laughed my ass off when it happened, and I hoped that the pilot didn't get in trouble for his Top Gun moment. But the Japanese tourists were all smiling as they brushed the dirt and sagebrush off their clothes. They thought it was great. How fun, how crazy these Americans are. A little further on down the road, I was sad to see that the place of the 2 arrows stuck in the ground in the Meteor City Geodesic Dome gift shop has gone bankrupt and we're falling apart. I've always liked those places, and I stop there often. The Dome played a nice part in the movie Starman starring Jeff Bridges and Nancy Allen. At that place, good guy Charles Martin Smith blew smoke in the face of bad guy Richard Jekyll. It was a great scene. It was sad to see the place decrepit, but nothing lasts forever, and that was the underlying current that was emerging of this trip. Nothing lasts forever. In the last year or so, the deaths of musicians I admired and saw in concert were just too many. B.B. King's death was hard to take. I saw him at the Handy Awards in Memphis, and he was a lovely man. I used to have lunch at B.B.'s place in Memphis and loved to soak up the aura. I bought a black Gibson guitar just like his, hoping to play like him. I never came close. Natalie Cole, whom I saw in St. Louis on her unforgettable tour with my daughter Tammy Pacheco, was a great loss. That concert was a magical night, and I miss Ms. Cole a lot. Glenn Yarborough was gone. He was that beautiful tenor voice in the folk group The Limelighters, and he was another lovely, lovely man. I saw him one night at the Hungry Eye in San Francisco during the height of the folk boom, and it was just a magical night. Leslie Gore, whom I fell in love with the first time I heard the song It's My Party and I'll Cry If I Want To, well, she died recently. Her music meant a lot when I was in high school, and I enjoyed following her career. Ben E. King's death was tough for me because I have always adored his songs Spanish Harlem, Say the Last Dance for Me, Stand By Me, and the haunting There Goes My Baby. I never got to see him in concert, but I've played his music for years. Little Jimmy Dickens, although not a rocker, was a mainstay of the Grand Ole Opry for decades, and I liked him. He was always resplendent in his nudie, sparkly suits, big cowboy hat, and rhinestone boots. The Opry used to have a touring troupe, of which Dickens was one, and they played at my college, University of Northern Colorado in Greeley. I was the sound man for touring shows. Now, the sound gear was really just a small 50-watt 4-channel Bose amp connected to the 6-inch speakers in the ceiling. No other knobs but volume. 4 knobs for 4 mics, and they only went to 10. This tiny PA was meant for guest speakers, but someone thought it would be adequate for concerts. I worked that tiny PA for acts like the legendary jazz musician Herbie Mann, the pop group The Grassroots, and many more. I had to apologize to each act for the dismal sound system. Most of them took it in stride. Anyway, the Grand Ole Opry concert was on a Sunday afternoon in one of the Student Center meeting rooms, and I worked the sound. Although only about 20 people showed up, all of them 60-something farmers in their best bib overalls and John Deere hats, Dickens and the rest of the performers worked the room like it was 5,000 fans in Nashville. In those days, country fans were the most loyal in the world, and they revered Dickens, and he worked his heart out for them. He was a lovely man. Well, Johnny Winter blew me away. I saw him a couple of times, and after each concert, I went home and practiced the guitar for days, hoping to play like him. Again, it never happened. Phil Everly. How can you explain the loss of one of the most beautiful voices in all of rock and roll? and an inspiration to everyone from the Beatles to the Stones. When he died, I was blue all day. The more I drove, the more I thought about musicians who had died too young. Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, Dave Guard, so many, so young. I remember when John Lennon was shot. I was playing a gig down in St. Croix in the Virgin Islands. I was living near the beach in a hut made of compressed coral. No windows, no doors, no running water, no electricity. But I laid on the beach all day, played music at night. Time of my life. The main source of news down there was the BBC, and of course, after Lennon was shot, the BBC ran nonstop news about his death. This was, after all, one of the BBC boys, their homie. I was struck by how emphatically the world reacted. But the death of Glen Frey has affected me more, I think. Maybe because he's one of our boys, our homie. Maybe it has affected me more because it's more recent and I've forgotten the impact of Lennon's death at the time on me. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. But I do know it's complicated. That's why I needed this road trip to figure it out. Now, the paradox here is that I was never a particular admirer of Glen Frey, the person, like I was Jon Stewart and Tom Waits and Tony Joe White. I doted on those last three men. I read everything I could about them and went to every single concert I could. What I'm mourning more, I guess, is the final exclamation point on an end of an era. That particular era of wonderful music from the 60s to the 70s. Frey and Eagles embodied the best of that. Frey was the guidon, and now he's gone. And so is that genre, and so is that time. It all went with him, as far as I was concerned. Like I said, it's complicated, and I needed to get on the road to figure this out. No way could I figure it out sitting home on the couch. I pulled into Winslow as the sun was getting dangerously low in the west. I wanted to take a lot of pictures, and I couldn't stay until the next morning. I had to get the shots now. So like Winslow is a small town, population 9473, on the old Route 66, and was a famous way stop for travelers going from Chicago to LA. But when I-40 bypassed the town, it atrophied to where it's now a ghost of its former self. But it has the statue. Over 100,000 people visit it each year. And here I was, because of an invisible pull, like a swallow returning to Capistrano. I drove down Old Highway 66 to North Kinsley Avenue, and there was the statue, with flowers and balloons around it and some folks paying tribute. I parked across the street, gathered up my camera, and walked over to the folks. But wait! What are these old people doing, having their pictures taken with a rock and roll memorial? No, this ain't right. They're too old for this. Eagles made music for the young, and I know because I was young. And so was Frey, and wait a minute. Hold the phone. I looked at the women, then looked at my reflection in a store window, and whoa, it hit me. I'm old too. And these women were old. And come to think of it, Frey was 67 when he died, and a lot of people consider that to be old. Damn, I'm 2 years older than that. Fuck, we're all old. And then it hit me about all this confusion and why I had to come here. I had been disoriented by the music that still sounds so vital and young. But its creator is old and dead. And I'm old too, although I don't feel old. See, that's the disorienting thing after all. I feel way younger than I am. But the body and disease and worn out joints don't give a shit what I think about it. The body is old, but the music is young. But the music was almost half a century ago. Well, it's still complicated, but now it made some sense. Sitting there on the bench across from the statue, I reconstructed my timeline and put everything into perspective. Few statues can capture me like that. But this one did. The kid in bronze looked like he was ready to say something, like he could walk across the street for a Coke at the Route 66 souvenir shop, then saunter back and take up his place again. Ah, yeah, now I understand. Time is a bitch. The concept of time is what's confusing me. The music won't grow old. The statue won't grow old either. And neither will the girl in the mural. But I will. And eventually I'll disappear, just like Frey. But the music will be around as long as there's electricity. And the statue will be there until no one cares to come see it. Just like after a while, nobody came to see the Roy Rogers Museum on the other end of Route 66 in Victorville, California. Everyone forgot who Rogers was, so they tore it down. Nothing lasts forever. Fame doesn't last. Fame is a liar. Fame is a bitch. Yeah, I figured it out now. Nothing lasts forever. And I'm getting old. It all makes sense now. It's weird that it took a road trip to figure this out, but for me, it's what works. Road trips are like that. I was relieved and felt at peace about all this. I took as many photos as I could before the sun went down, then gassed up and headed back to Vegas. The night hid all the old familiar landmarks on the way home, and that was comforting. I'd had enough nostalgia for one day. Back on the road. All demons released, all ghosts at rest.